The air campaign of the Gulf War, also known as the 1991 bombing of Iraq, started with an extensive aerial bombing campaign on January 17, 1991. The coalition flew over 100,000 sorties, dropping 88,500 tons of bombs, and widely destroying military and civilian infrastructure. The air campaign was commanded by USAF Lieutenant General Chuck Horner, who briefly served as Commander-in-Chief Forward of U.S. Central Command while General Schwarzkopf was still in the United States. The British air commanders were Air Vice-Marshal Andrew Wilson and Air Vice-Marshal Bill Wratten. The air campaign largely finished by February 23, 1991, when the coalition invasion of Kuwait took place. The initial strikes were composed of Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from warships situated in the Persian Gulf, F-117A Nighthawk stealth bombers with an armament of laser-guided smart bombs, and F-4G Wild Weasel aircraft armed with HARM anti-radar missiles. These first attacks allowed F-14, F-15, F-16, and F-A-18 fighter bombers to gain air superiority over the country and then continue to drop TV and laser-guided bombs. Armed with a Gatling gun and heat-seeking or optically guided Maverick missiles, the 10 Thunderbolts bombed and destroyed Iraqi armored forces, supporting the advance of U.S. ground troops. The AH-64 Apache and AH-1 Cobra attack helicopters fired laser-guided Hellfire missiles and TOW missiles which were guided to tanks by ground observers or scout helicopters. The coalition air fleet also made use of the E-3A airborne warning and control systems and a fleet of B-52 bombers. The aerial strike force was made up of over 2,250 combat aircraft, which included 1,800 U.S. aircraft, which fought against an Iraqi force of about 500 Soviet-built MiG-29, MiG-25, and MiG-23, and French-made Mirage F-1 fighters. Main air campaign starts. A day after the deadline set in United Nations Security Council Resolution 678, the coalition launched a massive air campaign, which began the general offensive codenamed Operation Desert Storm with more than 1,000 sorties launching per day. It began on January 17, 1991, at 2:10 a.m., Baghdad time, when Task Force Normandy of the U.S. Army destroyed Iraqi radar sites near the Iraqi-Saudi Arabian border which could have warned Iraq of an upcoming attack. At 2:43 a.m. two F-111 Ravens with terrain-following radar led 22 F-15E Strike Eagles against assaults on airfields in western Iraq. Minutes later, one of the F-111 cruiser Captain James Denton and Captain Brent Brandon destroyed an Iraqi Dassault Mirage F-1, when their low-altitude maneuvering led the F-1 to crash to the ground. At 3 a.m., 10 U.S. F-117 Nighthawk stealth bombers, under the protection of a three-ship formation of F-111s, bombed Baghdad, the capital. The striking force came under fire from 3,000 anti-aircraft guns firing from rooftops in Baghdad. Within hours of the start of the coalition air campaign, a P-3 Orion called Outlaw Hunter developed by the U.S. Navy's Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command, which was testing a highly specialized over-the-horizon radar, detected a large number of Iraqi patrol boats and naval vessels attempting to make a run from Basra and Qus to Iranian waters. Outlaw Hunter vectored in strike elements, which attacked the Iraqi naval flotilla near Bibian Island, destroying 11 vessels and damaging scores more. Concurrently, U.S. Navy BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles struck targets in Baghdad, and other coalition aircraft struck targets throughout Iraq. Government buildings, TV stations, airfields, presidential palaces, military installations, communication lines, supply bases, oil refineries, the Baghdad airport, electric power plants and factories making Iraqi war machine equipment were all destroyed due to extensive massive aerial and missile attacks by the coalition forces. 5 hours after the first attacks, Iraq's state radio broadcast a voice identified as Saddam Hussein declaring that the Great Duel, the mother of all battles, has begun. The dawn of victory nears as this great showdown begins. The Persian Gulf War is sometimes called the Computer War, due to the advanced weapons used in the air campaign, which included precision-guided munitions and cruise missiles, although these were very much in the minority when compared with dumb bombs. cluster munitions and Blu-82 Daisy cutters were also used. Iraq responded by launching 8 Iraqi modified Scud missiles into Israel the next day. These missile attacks on Israel were to continue throughout the 6 weeks of the war. On the first night of the war, 2 F-A-18s from the carrier USS Saratoga were flying outside of Baghdad when 2 Iraqi MiG-25s engaged them. In the beyond visual range kill, an Iraqi MiG-25 piloted by Zahid Dawood fired an F-40A missile. The missile impacted Scott Seicher's F-A-18 head-on. The impact sent the aircraft spiraling downwards. The wreckage was discovered in 1993. Seicher was buried near his wreck site by local Bedouin nomads. Russian sources claim also numerous other hits on coalition aircraft, however only a clumsy effort appears to have been made to match the supposed events to actual coalition aircraft being damaged or lost. Often these claims are on wrong date compared to the actual aircraft damage or lost time and place, except Seicher's Hornet. In an effort to demonstrate their own air offensive capability, on January 24 the Iraqis attempted to mount a strike against the major Saudi oil refinery in Abqaiq. 2 Mirage F-1 fighters laden with incendiary bombs and 2 MiG-23s took off from bases in Iraq. They were spotted by USAWACs, and 2 Royal Saudi Air Force F-15s were sent to intercept. When the Saudis appeared, the Iraqi MiGs turned tail, but the Mirages pressed on. Captain Iyad al-Shimrani, one of the Saudi pilots, maneuvered his jet behind the Mirages and shot down both aircraft. After this episode, the Iraqis made no more air efforts of their own, only sending most of their jets to Iran in hopes that they might someday get their air force back. Iran never returned the jets. The first priority for coalition forces was the destruction of Iraqi command and control bunkers, Scud missile launch pads and storage areas, telecommunications and radio facilities, and airfields. The attack began with a wave of deep penetrating aircraft, Euro F-111s, F-15s, Tornado GA-1s, F-16s, A-6s, A-7s, and F-117s, complemented by F-15C, F-14s and air defense Tornadoes. EA-6Bs, EF-111 radar jammers, and F-117A stealth planes were heavily used in this phase to elude Iraq's extensive SAM systems and anti-aircraft weapons. The sorties were launched mostly from Saudi Arabia and the 6 coalition aircraft carrier battle groups in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. During the initial 24 hours 2,775 sorties were flown, including 7 B-52s which flew a 34-hour non-stop 14,000-mile round trip from Barksdale Air Force Base and launched 13 AGM-86 EALCM cruise missiles against Iraqi targets. Persian Gulf CVBGs included USS Midway, USS Theodore Roosevelt, and USS Ranger. USS America, USS John F. Kennedy, and USS Saratoga operated from the Red Sea. Iraqi anti-aircraft defenses, including shoulder-launched ground-to-air missiles, were surprisingly ineffective against coalition aircraft, and the coalition suffered only 75 aircraft losses in over 100,000 sorties, though only 42 of these were the result of Iraqi action. The other 33 were lost to accidents. In particular, RAF and U.S. Navy aircraft which flew at low altitudes to avoid radar were particularly vulnerable, though this changed when the air crews were ordered to fly above the AAA. The next coalition targets were command and communication facilities. Saddam Hussein had closely micromanaged the Iraqi forces in the Iran-Iraq War, and initiative at lower levels was discouraged. Coalition planners hoped that Iraqi resistance would quickly collapse if deprived of command and control. Some of Iraq's Air Force squadrons escaped. The first week of the air war saw a few Iraqi sorties, but these did little damage, and 38 Iraqi MiGs were shot down by coalition planes. Soon after, the Iraqi Air Force began fleeing to Iran, with 115 to 140 aircraft flown there. This mass exodus of Iraqi aircraft took coalition forces by surprise, as the coalition had been expecting them to flee to Jordan, a nation friendly to Iraq, rather than Iran, a longtime enemy. As a purpose of the war was to weaken Iraq militarily, The coalition had placed aircraft over western Iraq to try to stop any retreat into Jordan. This meant they were unable to react before most of the Iraqi aircraft had made it safely to Iranian air bases. The coalition eventually established a virtual wall of F-15 Eagle, F-14 Tomcat fighters and F-16 Fighting Falcons on the Iraq-Iran border, thereby stopping the exodus of fleeing Iraqi fighters. Iran has never returned the aircraft to Iraq and did not allow the air crews to be released until years later. However, many Iraqi planes remained in Iraq, and several were destroyed by coalition forces. Infrastructure bombing. The third and largest phase of the air campaign ostensibly targeted military targets throughout Iraq and Kuwait, Scud missile launchers, weapons research facilities, and naval forces. About one-third of the coalition air power was devoted to attacking Scuds, some of which were on trucks and therefore difficult to locate. Some U.S. and British Special Forces teams had been covertly inserted into western Iraq to aid in the search and destruction of Scuds. However, the lack of adequate terrain for concealment hindered their operations, and some of them were killed or captured, such as occurred with the widely publicized Bravo 20 patrol of the SAS. Civilian infrastructure. Coalition bombing raids destroyed Iraqi civilian infrastructure. 11 of Iraq's 20 major power stations and 119 substations were totally destroyed, while a further 6 major power stations were damaged. At the end of the war, electricity production was at 4% of its pre-war levels. Bombs destroyed the utility of all major dams, most major pumping stations, and many sewage treatment plants, telecommunications equipment, port facilities, oil refineries and distribution. Railroads and bridges were also destroyed. The Iraqi targets were located by aerial photography and were referenced to the GPS coordinates of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, which were determined by a USAF senior officer in August 1990. He arrived at the airport carrying a briefcase with a GPS receiver in it, then an embassy car took him to the embassy. He walked to the embassy courtyard, opened the briefcase, took one GPS reading, and put the machine back in the case. Then he returned to the U.S., gave the GPS receiver to the appropriate intelligence agency in Langley, Virginia, where the exact coordinates of the U.S. Baghdad embassy were officially determined. This position served as the origin for a coordinate system used to designate targets in Baghdad. The U.S. bombed highways and bridges linking Jordan and Iraq, crippling infrastructure on both sides. Civilian casualties. The U.S. government claimed the Iraqi government fabricated numerous attacks on Iraqi holy sites in order to rally the Muslim community. One such instance had Iraq reporting that coalition forces attacked the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala. The final number of Iraqi civilians killed was 2,278, while 5,965 were reported wounded. On February 13, 1991, 2 laser-guided smart bombs destroyed the Amariyah blockhouse, which was a civilian air raid shelter, killing hundreds of civilians. U.S. officials claimed that the blockhouse was also a military communications center. Jeremy Bowen, a BBC correspondent, was one of the first television reporters on the scene. Bowen was given access to the site and did not find evidence of military use. A day after the Amariyah attack, a British warplane fired a laser-guided missile at a bridge in the Al-Fallujah neighborhood west of Baghdad. It missed and hit a residential area, killing up to 130 civilians. When friends and relatives rushed to the scene to assist the injured, British warplanes returned to bomb them, as well. Vulnerability of Iraq to air attacks. The air campaign devastated entire Iraqi brigades deployed in the open desert in combat formation. It also prevented an effective Iraqi resupply of units engaged in combat, and prevented some 450,000 Iraqi troops from achieving a larger force concentration. The air campaign had a significant effect on the tactics employed by opposing forces in subsequent conflicts. Entire Iraqi divisions were dug in the open while facing U.S. forces. They were not dispersed, as with the Yugoslav forces in Kosovo. Iraqi forces also tried to reduce the length of their supply lines and the total area defended. Losses. Iraq lost a total of 259 aircraft in the war, 105 of which were lost in combat. During Desert Storm, 36 aircraft were shot down in aerial combat. 3 helicopters and 2 fighters were shot down during the invasion of Kuwait on August 2, 1990. Kuwait claims to have shot down as many as 37 Iraqi aircraft. These claims have not been confirmed. In addition, 68 fixed-wing aircraft and 13 helicopters were destroyed while on the ground, and 137 aircraft were flown to Iran and never returned. The coalition lost a total of 75 aircraft Euro 52 fixed-wing aircraft and 23 helicopters Euro during Desert Storm, with 39 fixed-wing aircraft and 5 helicopters lost in combat. 1 coalition fighter may have been lost in air-air combat, a U.S. Navy F-A-18 piloted by Scott Seicher. Other claims include an RAF Tornado GA-1A piloted by Gary Lennox and Adrian Weeks. However, the Tornado in question crashed to the ground due to pilot error on a different date than the supposed air-to-air killers claimed to have taken place. 1 B-52G was lost while returning to its operating base on Diego Garcia, when it suffered a catastrophic electrical failure and crashed into the Indian Ocean, killing 3 of the 6 crew members on board. The rest of the coalition losses came from anti-aircraft fire. The Americans lost 28 fixed-wing aircraft and 5 helicopters. The British lost 7 fixed-wing aircraft. The Saudi Arabians lost 2. The Italians lost 1. And the Kuwaitis lost 1. The Canadians, on the other hand, lost 0. During the invasion of Kuwait on August 2, 1990, the Kuwaiti Air Force lost 12 fixed-wing aircraft, which were destroyed on the ground, and 8 helicopters, 6 of which were shot down and 2 of which were destroyed while on the ground. See also, Gulf War Air Power Survey, Air Engagements of the Gulf War, Notes. References. External links. Bibliography of the Desert Shield and Desert Storm compiled by the United States Army Center of Military History.